Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Priced Out Podcast. I'm Dylan, and I'm here with Kelley and Marin County Supervisor Damon Connolly, representing District 1, San Rafael. Welcome to our podcast. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And before we dive in, can you briefly go over your background and how you came to be in the present position you're in today?
Sure. Well, I'm the Marin County Supervisor for District 1, and that covers Greater San Rafael. I was elected in 2014, so I've been at the job for about 6 years now. Before that, I was a San Rafael City Council member for about 7 years and a school board member. Professionally, and kind of my first passion, if you will, was to become a lawyer. So practiced law for my career, and that having been said, kind of always had a strong interest in public service. So after some time in private practice, worked for the California Attorney General's office. Back in the day, one of the things that was noteworthy that you may recall, in the early 2000s, California was going through a serious energy crisis. So our job with the AG's office and the unit I was in was to go after those out-of-state power generators that we felt had ripped off California during the crisis. So very good professional experience. And after that, actually ended up starting my own practice, which was another professional goal. While serving on the San Rafael City Council. And interestingly, to note, after my professional experience learning all about the energy markets, working with the AG's office, I was actually one of the founding board members of Marin Clean Energy back in the day while I was on the San Rafael City Council, and ultimately became the president of that organization, or chair of the board, I should say, of that organization, and very much fit into my passion for environmental issues, renewable energy. So fast forward a little bit, in 2014, ended up running for this position against an incumbent, actually, which doesn't happen every day. My understanding is it hadn't happened in about 20 years before that, but the sense was the community might be ready for a change, and sure enough, we won. So the big change has been, this is full-time and then some, so kind of wrapped up my legal practice, and have been spending all my time on this job, which has been great.
Wow, wonderful. And now it looks like, we're all faced with this crazy virus that I think nobody could have predicted. And I'm sure that's put you and the people around you in a very difficult position, and we appreciate the work that you've been doing.
Generally, we'd be connecting to talk about kind of the whole range of issues we work on, right? Housing, environment, homelessness, transportation. None of those issues are receding, but what's really been noteworthy for me is it's put into perspective. At the end of the day, the main thing county government does and supervisors do is protect the public health. So we have been just working full time right now on the pandemic and the response and looking forward, while frankly also addressing all the other issues that haven't gone away either.
Well, yeah, we're glad for the work that you guys are doing. And I think the group that seems to be hit the most hard so far is local businesses. And I was wondering if one of our listeners is a local business owner, what resources could you direct them to that could help them out in this tough time?
Yeah, and first of all, I always start by thanking everyone really for abiding by the shelter-in-place orders, by staying at home. Hard to believe for these last 9 weeks, as we're talking today on a Friday afternoon, the end of week 9. It really has made a difference, though, and I think we can be proud of Marin residents for stepping up early and getting the job done. We're really seeing the results. That having been said, it's not without cost. I mean, we've seen extraordinary economic stressors for individuals, for small businesses, as you mentioned, students, people's mental health. Certainly our lives have been upended. So the approach we've been taking so far, and then I'll talk a little bit about looking forward, to date has been really working with small businesses, working with people to provide relief. So in San Rafael, for example, we work with the city to establish and the business community to establish a small business relief fund. And actually, we're able to raise about $300,000 that has gone directly into grants for local small businesses. At the same time, we've been helping the businesses navigate the array of federal programs that have come online, things like the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program through Small Business Administration. Those programs have provided some relief. It's been a little bit spotty, as we know, but apparently from what I'm hearing more recently, finally some of those funds are coming through. A big issue that came to light early on was the impact on tenants in our community and landlords, for that matter. So we acted quickly to do an eviction ordinance, eviction moratorium ordinance that became effective countywide. That's kind of another interesting thing. Ordinarily, in some of the areas we address at the county level, like land use, our jurisdiction would be limited to unincorporated areas around. So in my district, places like Marinwood, Lucas Valley, Santa Benicia. Under the emergency powers that counties are granted during this type of emergency, the ordinances we come up with can actually extend countywide. And that was the case with our eviction moratorium ordinance, where it actually applies to every city and town in Marin. So it establishes that there's a moratorium through May 31 on evictions in Marin. And I'll give you a little bit of news today that's not public yet, that we're likely to extend that by a month at our next board meeting or shortly thereafter. Concurrent with that, we felt it was important to provide a grace period. And by the way, just to specify, the current moratorium applies to both residential and commercial leases. Going forward, we're probably going to be emphasizing residential more. There's a repayment grace period because the last thing we wanted was for all rent to become due June 1, right? And then everything is due all at once. So there's actually a 90-day grace period to repay or pay the rent by the tenants. We felt that was a good sweet spot for tenants and landlords, and kind of adheres to the state kind of laws that are now in place to deal with the crisis as well. I'd recommend that folks check out Legal Aid in Marin. They have a great video kind of describing more of the details of the program. So going forward, we are also well aware that while public health is always the paramount consideration, that we have to come up with a game plan and a roadmap to reopen our businesses and our local community. So we're doing that now through Marin Recovers, and I recommend a couple of websites to folks. MarinRecovers.com, which talks about the three-phased approach that we're doing. And then coronavirus.marinhhs.org, which is kind of our comprehensive website that deals with all aspects of the COVID response, including some great data on indicators that we're relying on. So phase one was really leading up to this point, getting things like testing in place, which is now well established, and we're actually going to be expanding testing to get up to about 500 tests a day is a goal. We're hoping to get up to about 300 by the end of the month next week, and we're over 200 now. Tracking and tracing, it's going to be very important that when folks with symptoms are identified, or with the virus, you can even be asymptomatic, as we know, that there's a protocol in place to track others that you've been in contact with and investigate that, just so we can kind of avoid spread of the virus. Hospital capacity, we're in good shape. ICU capacity, same. So the stage is set. So what we're doing is we've now moved into phase two, and that's sequential opening of the economy and other aspects of the community, like parks and open space. There was an initial loosening a couple weeks ago that saw all construction opened with safety protocols in place, as well as some parks and open space, namely if you could walk or bike to your parks. Other outdoor recreation activities like golf, landscaping, gardening. Okay, so that was a couple weeks ago. The theory is, in the meantime, and we actually are not seeing any real issues with that, people are adhering to the protocols, et cetera. That will also give us additional data to look at. And we're systematically doing that through Marin Recovers. Namely, it's a public-private partnership that brings together leaders from various industry sectors in Marin, the cities and towns of Marin, and public health, local chambers, and really marrying how can we, in a way that respects public health, open sectors of the economy. And the philosophy behind it is, me as a supervisor, or Dr. Matt Willis as a public health officer, and by the way, he's a very smart guy, but he doesn't know how to run particular businesses, right? So that's where we're really relying on the businesses and their business leaders themselves to inform this process. So as of today, there's going to be a new order that will go in effect Monday, May 18th, that's going to see further loosening. Namely, we're going to have all retail open for curbside. So that's a significant change, as well as associated manufacturing and warehouse activities. We're also further loosening access to parks and open space, again, as of this Monday, where you will actually be able to drive to your local park and open space. That's, as we know, very important for seniors who may not be able to walk necessarily to a nearby park. What will remain closed is beaches, kind of federal and state parks. The theory being that large groups kind of travel there, right, from all over the region, and also large groups gather. We want to continue to avoid that for the time being. Next phase, and again, the dance that's going on, as you guys know as well, is this isn't just county decision making. We're also looking at what the state does through the governor. The way to think about it is that the state sets a floor. Counties cannot go beyond that in terms of loosening. They can be more strict, and to date, the Bay Area counties kind of have been, including Marin. I think what you're seeing is kind of counties moving more toward where the state is. And the next phase there will kind of be office and indoor restaurants, actually, is something being looked at now. So stay tuned over the next couple weeks. You know, things are changing every day. It's extraordinary, or certainly by the week. The governor has also indicated that counties theoretically can move beyond the state if they are able to certify to certain things and attest that guidelines are being met. The feedback we're hearing is that most counties will not be able to meet those. So really, I think there has been some feedback to the governor in that regard, namely things like you would have to be able to show that there are 0 deaths over a 14-day period, no matter what size county you are. That's going to be a tough one. So what you're seeing is you have some rural, kind of northern California counties that are meeting that threshold. They're moving even beyond and further loosening even additional things like gyms, et cetera. We're not there yet. I think we're going to, in fairly short order, kind of meld with where the state is right now, continue to evaluate things. And then phase 3, which is a more comprehensive opening, is further down the line. That's where you're going to see like large group gatherings, right? You know, events, sporting events, those kind of things. Concurrent with that, a huge issue that we're all interested in, of course, is schools. You know, I've spent some time over the last couple weeks speaking to a number of high school government classes around.
Marin Catholic, right?
Yeah, Marin Catholic.
Yeah, graduate, yeah.
All right, good. No, really enjoy that. Terra Linda High, you know, the Marin School of Environmental Leadership. And number one, it's always so valuable to do that. But boy, you know, our hearts go out to those seniors, right, who are missing that traditional graduation, you know, the prom, et cetera. But, you know, I was really impressed. They're hanging in there. There's a lot of uncertainty in their near future if they're going to college. You know, is that initial semester going to be online?
Well, the Cal State University system has just announced that they're going to be majorly online in the fall. I attend San Francisco State, so we're going to have to adapt to it. And
there you go.
Industries are going to be affected in this as well. Being able to adapt and use technology in, you know, modern day work. So you're doing it right now. You've been doing it for your meetings. So
yeah, no, would love to keep in touch with you on that. I mean, people are really interested. And then K-12, you know, Governor Newsom's talking about maybe a July reopen. That seems pretty optimistic. You know, by July, we'll see. But certainly looking at the fall, you know, how is that going to look as well? So we're kind of working through all these issues as a community, balancing safety with kind of the need to get back on our feet and get people back to their jobs. So our kind of, you know, way to do that, if you will, is to come together through Marin Recovers, self-empower people with the right guidelines, and that kind of is an ongoing process that's in full gear right now.
Wonderful. Well, I think you answered all of our questions and more about COVID-19. Thank you for the comprehensive look behind the scenes. So I want to give the floor so we can explore some other topics to Kelley. So she's going to talk to you about some other topics that might have been getting neglected while this whole virus thing has been going on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so thank you for all of that. I think that in general, the Board of Supervisors has done a great job in maintaining transparency with the public. I've attended your online meetings and having the, Marin County Public Health Officer, Matt Willis, give an update, and Matt Heimel, County Administrator, give his input as well. It's been really invaluable to people trying to get that information from the leaders of our community.
Thanks
you
for
are
that.
A member of Oh yeah, of course. So you are a member of MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, correct?
Yes. Does everyone may not know what that is, right?
Right. Can you tell us a little bit, just like really quick, about how long you've been on the board and what that job consists of?
Yeah, so I'm the Metropolitan Transportation Commission representative for Marin, including the county and all the cities and towns. And MTC is the 9-county Bay Area regional transportation body. So all federal and state and regional transportation dollars flow through MTC. So it's a very important body, and I've served on it, I think, about 3 years now. I'm the vice chair of the operations committee within MTC. So yeah, very, very engaged in it.
Definitely. We at Next Summer and make it a point to try to attend MTC.
About 4 years now. So I've actually been there a little while now. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's okay. I was just saying that we at Next Summer and make it a habit to attend these meetings and ABAG meetings as well.
Yeah.
So obviously something that, was a big controversy in the Bay Area is AB 1487, which was passed into law. The San Francisco Bay Area Regional Housing Finance Act, which creates the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. And seeing as you are on the board of MTC, you will be now on the, part of this new authority. So what I was wondering was, can you tell our listeners what the difference will be in terms of your current role of MTC in conjunction with ABAG, in conjunction with ABAG, as opposed to this new authority that's been created by AB 1487? What that difference will be?
Great question, Kelley. And in fact, we need to back up a little bit because the hot topic right now is the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, which was created by AB 1487, as you noted. Maybe I'll just call it BAFA, so we don't have to keep saying it every time. BAFA has actually not been, they call it stood up yet. So it's not.
Oh, okay. In November?
No. So what happens is MTC and ABAG actually have to vote on standing up BAFA. There's two key issues right now. So this is a really timely discussion. The other thing that 1487 authorized is actually the potential to put a ballot measure on for November of this year or thereafter, Bay Area wide. So for all 9 counties to potentially fund affordable housing projects, whether they be production of new units, protection of rental units, or preservation, which is another strategy in tackling affordable housing that Marin has been utilizing. So there's two things going on, and both are going to be coming up for a vote. In fact, the vote's going to be May 27th at MTC, and right before that at ABAG. One is whether to authorize going forward with a ballot measure this November, per AB 1487. There's some polling in the field right now. I don't think you're going to get any question mark that housing remains one of the top issues locally here in Marin as well as regionally. What's going to be noteworthy, though, is whether there is a public appetite at all for going forward with a new revenue measure this November, given the COVID issue and the economic hardships everyone is facing, including local governments. So the proposal theoretically is for a $10 billion government obligation bond. So I will be very interested in seeing those polling results, talking more with folks here locally that I represent on MTC, and getting community feedback on that. So the second issue, irrespective of whether or not a ballot measure goes forward in November, will be whether or not to stand up BAFA as a new entity. It's not really a new agency, but it's kind of a new entity within MTC and ABAG if it goes forward. So the questions there are kind of what's the value add? On one hand, we anticipate that there could be an opportunity to access some new federal dollars as well as potentially state and regional, but primarily federal on the housing front, even in the near future in response to COVID. Would a regional agency like BAFA facilitate local jurisdictions getting that money? The last thing we would want to do is actually impede local jurisdictions from getting money. So that's one thing I'm going to be looking at. As long as it theoretically adds value, that would be a positive. And then the second piece, of course, is right now MTC and ABAG have a very talented housing-related staff. You know, as you can well imagine, we're dealing with those issues all the time. So a little bit more detail on would BAFA involve kind of reorganizing that same staff, adding new staff? If so, what's the cost? You know, so again, in this kind of belt tightening era we find ourselves in, does it make sense? So I'm keeping an open mind. I haven't made a final decision on either issue. Like I said, listening to a lot of different perspectives on it, but can't emphasize enough that I think everyone shares the same objectives. That's getting the right resources to our local communities, tackling housing in a way that makes sense locally, and I think we have shown some results. There's a lot more we need to do, and just kind of that value add, even from a regional perspective.
Well, thank you for that thorough answer. This is, this is a big bill that we've been keeping our eye on and that we've been anxious to see where it goes from here. So thank you for that. In terms of talking about effects that COVID has had on local agencies, obviously there's a lot in the news lately. You know, the Marin County Board of Education with layoffs, and the city of San Rafael furloughing non-public safety employees. Needless to say, local jurisdictions are having to slash expenses wherever they can and generate revenues. There was also recently a survey gauging kind of public feeling about a quarter-cent sales tax in San Rafael, you know? So it's interesting that you mentioned that, the $10 billion bond maybe not going on the November ballot, but, cities and jurisdictions are going to need to make the money up somewhere. We're risk cutting employees unless we're consolidating, maybe agencies. Dick Spotswood wrote in the Marin IJ recently about consolidating like fire and sewer agencies and things like that. So what are some of is the County of Marin looking at any of those kind of, paths to try to fix its budget and, work at a surplus as opposed to a deficit?
Yeah, great question. We're always looking at ways of doing things more efficiently, and that's going to be even more at the forefront now. I mean, starting with the fact that, the state is looking at probably about a $54 billion budget. And I don't know if you know this, about 40% of the county's budget is federal money and related state. So anything that obviously happens at those levels has a huge impact.
Trickles down.
Yeah. So we have started to tackle that. I think the good news is because of some careful planning in recent years, including beefing up reserves and being fairly prudent, it looks like we're going to be in a position where initially, because our fiscal year ends June 30th, so we've actually got to pass a new budget by June 15th, so within a few weeks. We're going to be able to do a rollover budget at the county level and then look to tee up some key decision-making for this fall and then heading into the next fiscal year, where there likely will be a fair amount of pain that we're going to have to go through. So we're going to have to look at everything. But I guess somewhat good news is right now, as we get through this fiscal year and look toward the next with the new budget, at least through utilization of some reserves, creating some efficiencies, it looks like we'll be able to at least initially weather this and then look at making some larger changes a little bit down the road. You raised some great points, though. I think things like, does it make sense to look at whether some agencies can be consolidated, or other, pension issues are always a big one that are at the top of mind. So we'll, this could be an opportunity to look at some things, that maybe have been a long time coming. So, yeah.
Yeah. That actually is a great segue. You're giving me perfect segues into my next question. So thank you.
Yeah.
So speaking about the coronavirus crisis and its impacts on our lives, there's certainly the economy, but also the coronavirus, it's played kind of, as the backdrop into some people's narratives. For instance, some people are saying that New York is experiencing an extreme number of cases due to its density, while others are saying that we can use the economic recovery period to kind of get things in line. Let's provide equitable opportunities for people of all different income levels to be able to have access to opportunities like schools and things that are so important and add to the quality of life. So I guess my question to you, as someone who sits on MTC as well as the Marin County Board of Supervisors, how do you see the coronavirus crisis impacting future housing policy in Marin County or the Bay Area?
Yeah, and I don't think it's just housing policy. I mean, going back to MTC as well, you look at transportation policy, right? I mean, our transit systems have just taken a tremendous hit through this. Just as a couple of examples, Marin Transit ridership is down over 80%. Smart ridership is down over 90%, as is the ferry. So how does that look like going forward? I mean, my sense is, and kind of going to the point you're making, it might be an opportunity to really look at ways of thinking creatively, thinking comprehensively about how do we make transit and housing, for that matter, you know, such that people are going to be attracted to it and use it, right? You know, in the short term, transit is also now relying on a fairly big allocation out of the Federal CARES Act. So at MTC, we just allocated, I think it was literally over about $600 million to Bay Area transit agencies, and the ones in Marin got a part of that allocation. But what we then did, and it goes to your point, is in terms of the second allocation, because the total amount to the Bay Area was about 1.3 billion. So doing some quick math, I think we have about 600 to 700 million more left out of CARES. We actually want to think more strategically. Not just distribute the money, but really look at, and this is actually going to be accomplished in part through the use of a blue ribbon task force that was just appointed through MTC to actually look at the future of transit in the Bay Area. And being kind of a glass half full person, I see it as an opportunity to really think creatively, think strategically, really get out there in the community and have conversations and envision it, right? I mean, as much as this whole situation obviously has been extremely hard, as we talked about earlier, on people, but I think at the same time, you know, you can't help but look outside as we're talking, and, you know, the sky is noticeably bluer, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be important as we go forward to keep that kind of mental picture in our mind as we evaluate what is possible going forward. How can we perhaps look at policies and look at things differently in a way that enhances a lot of the goals that we've long had, right? Like improving the environment through transportation, housing, other policies. So that's what's kind of exciting to me. On the housing front, I think it's too early to tell. I think the macro picture is that both transportation and housing are largely driven by the economy. And that now is in flux, as we know, Bay Area wide. Are we going to see the economy change locally? How long is it going to take to recover? I'm fairly bullish on the Bay Area economy still. I think, you know, particularly with things like the tech sector, that does not seem to be lessening. If anything, it's increasing, as we know. But that having been said, what kind of keeps me up at night as well is you could continue to see the middle class and those struggling more in our economy to be hit even harder here, right? And we always have to keep the equity lens front and center on this. Underserved communities are not only disproportionately being hard hit by the virus itself, and we're kind of seeing that, but the aftermath could hit them particularly hard as well. So I think as we navigate the economy and we continue to support policies that uphold and create jobs for everyone, that also is going to inform our housing and transportation policies as well. in a sense, best case scenario could be maybe people have more of an opportunity to telecommute, right? So that's going to affect levels of congestion and people's ability to move around the region. There is a theory, I think, as you noted, that, are people going to be scared off by density in housing? I don't have a sense of that right now. I think, again, the key going forward is going to be to do the right public health protocols for the time being. Till, obviously, if we can get a vaccine or if we have a drug treatment protocol that solves this thing, that's one thing. But the conventional wisdom is that's not going to happen for a while. So we're all going to have to be very vigilant wherever we're at, whether that's a work environment or a housing environment. We're going to have to, practice that physical distancing, washing hands, wearing our face masks and the like. So I don't think we can draw any sweeping conclusions right now on types of housing. I think, and I know I'm going on a little bit, I'll say one final housing piece. I think the immediate need, and we talked about this a little bit before, is going to be on the protection piece of the 3 Ps. So really working closely with tenants and landlords to avoid displacement. You're already seeing some willingness to do that at the state level as well as federal level. And obviously, as we've shown, we're more than willing to kind of wade into that at the local level as well. So I would say that's going to be kind of an initial focus. And then beyond that, the other 2 Ps as well, of course, preservation and production.
Great. Well, speaking of housing, I wanted to ask you about a specific housing project that I hope won't be fallen by the wayside. You mentioned actually the Northgate Mall, I believe, at the joint ABAG and MTC meeting held January 1st. And it excited me because you said there's a dilapidated mall, and I presume that would be Northgate, that residents are thinking of including housing.
No offense to the owners, right?
Of course, yeah. So I was wondering, what is the future of the Northgate project, and how can elected officials aid in maybe making that a piece of housing?
Yeah, I think you'd have a lot of community support around the potential for housing there. And as you know, that's not always the case.
Yeah, very aware of that, unfortunately.
You see it as an opportunity. And I think that's been a sentiment for a number of years now. I was kind of disappointed to hear from the owners a while back that they were moving away from that concept and looking more at just a straight commercial play, including even potentially a Costco there, which I think has raised a lot of legitimate concerns from folks, not only just those who are immediate neighbors of it, but even beyond. When I was on the city council, one of the first things I did, because I believe it was at the time when the mall actually got upgraded last time, was actually asked the then owners to compile a housing study to show some possibilities there. And so I think the idea has been out there. There's now a new owner since then, the one that's indicated that it's not in the cards. I'd really like to see continued discussion of that, though. And I think the community and interested groups like yours could really play a role in pushing for that. I think there would be some support.
Yeah, we definitely love to see that go somewhere in the direction of housing at least. And I wanted to bring up one final question from that meeting.
By the way, just not to make it all about COVID, but boy, where's the mall business model going to be after this, right? It was already hurting. I know they were looking at some different strategies, but, I think in light of this, I can only imagine that the timing might be that much more better to look at different options right now.
Yeah, we've seen retailers fail across the country that weren't doing so well even before the virus. So I think it'll be very interesting to see going forward what happens with that. And I wanted to ask, during that meeting also, ABAG and MTC very generally discussed the possibility of drafting policy to sort of limit maybe growth in job-rich areas and bring jobs to housing-rich areas. There's a lot of talk of those sort of job-rich areas and then also housing-rich and equalizing those two. There was a few solutions, and I heard some that concerned me, including fees on new office development or putting caps on commercial construction. And that seems to me like that might hurt our local economy as the Bay Area more than help. And I just wanted to get some of your thoughts on that. I know Marin is kind of a housing-rich part of the Bay Area, but what are your thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, I don't think those issues have, I recall kind of the talking points. I forget the context. I don't think those issues have really risen up to the level of discussion yet. I believe what you're referencing is probably Plan Bay Area 2050, right? And the regional growth strategies. So yeah, certainly we don't want to do anything that kind of reduces our ability to have a strong local economy. I mean, there's always kind of striking the right balance, but I'm always wary of kind of those one size fits all, you know, kind of regional mandates, if you will. So I kind of share your concerns. If and when those issues kind of rise up for more discussion, we'll certainly keep that in mind for sure.
Great. I'm glad to hear that for sure. Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was all that we had for you today. Kelley, did you have any more? Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, I have one. Oh, you're okay. So given that you are on a regional board, you know, you work with ABAG, you're looking at the greater Bay Area. You know, that being said, you also are representing Marin, and a big topic of interest in housing is maintaining local control as it pertains to, you know, some people's perspective of the state trying to impose laws and restrictions and standards upon maybe smaller jurisdictions like Marin. You know, that some people say don't build enough affordable housing. I guess my question would kind of be, in Plan Bay Area 2050, as you guys have been constructing this over the past few months, and as progress has been made recently, do you think that RHNA numbers, that's regional housing needs allocation, do you think that those numbers are going to be more restrictive upon local jurisdictions during this new housing element cycle, or do you think that there's going to be a slackening due to COVID? Has ABAG and MTC, have they talked about that in relation to Plan Bay Area?
That's a great question, Kelley. No, we do not know yet. The word we were getting pre-COVID was that we were likely to face increased RHNA numbers for each local jurisdiction. We didn't really receive word on how much of an increase, but certainly we were ready to probably see that and then react to it as appropriate. You raise a number of good points. I mean, I think the initial concern kind of famously arose back in the original Plan Bay Area process, right? Which literally battles ensued over that, and in some respects, well-deserved. I think there was a sense that it was kind of a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach. I think ABAG has learned lessons from that in how it's approached this new process. I will say some of these issues still arise, though, and the good news is I think we're still able to work through them. One that that's created a lot of local concern over the last few years in Marin is the concept that arises of conditioning transportation dollars on actual production of housing. So most counties, frankly, including ours, has pushed back on that for a couple reasons. One is there's a housing shortage, but we also know we're facing a transportation crisis, and there's limited transportation dollars available that we need. So we've pushed back on conditioning. Secondly, again, is the notion that one size doesn't fit all, and there's a lot of factors that go in locally to how new housing is created, right? It's not just a government turning the on switch. It's developers, it's local conditions, the economics of it, et cetera. That having been said, there are appropriate programs currently in place, and I don't think we'd have a problem with those being continued or even expanded, of incentivizing housing through the use of infrastructure investments. You're seeing in Marin, we're making some progress in the approach of local jurisdictions should be able to voluntarily nominate priority development areas rather than having them imposed, which was the problem with the original Plan B area. So in Marin, downtown San Rafael and its environs is a priority development area. And that allows it to attract transportation funds, et cetera. And you're seeing a lot of good stuff around there. And it all kind of fits in together. You have the SMART station there. You're going to have a relocated downtown transit center. We were able to secure funding for that through Regional Measure 3. And there's a number of new housing developments going up, as you know, and some other interesting stuff like a hotel, a senior center, and there's actually even some additional proposals potentially down the line, like this Market Square proposal. We'll see if that ever comes online, but it looks pretty creative as to what they're talking about. So, you know, I always push back a little bit at the reputation of Marin, if you will, which I'm sometimes reminded of when I'm sitting there at MTC.
Oh yeah. Almost every time I've listened to a meeting, I hear some kind of little comment in there with, you know, like Marin's not doing enough, and I kind of just sit there and listen and see if anyone says anything.
No, so I'm glad you're tuning in, because you'll always hear me take the opportunity to talk about what we are doing as well. So, frankly, in the area of all three Ps, and on preservation, in particular, things like the Coast Guard facility that we just bought out in West Marin that's going to be converted to affordable housing, which is a great public-private partnership, Victory Village in Fairfax. There's others on the drawing board. So that's important as well. I think, you know, with Marin, there are justifiable sensitivities around let's keep the beautiful surroundings we have, the, small town feel in a sense, the quality of life, but yet meet our needs, to meet the needs of our residents. And it takes a little bit more work, but it's doable. And I think it really is going to be striking that right balance, but we're approaching it in good faith. So, as I sit there at MTC, I always feel that we have a story to tell And yes, we also need to be part of the solution as well.
Yes, definitely. I myself am a proud member of San Rafael. I always look at their progress and housing projects and I brag about it, and I say, I hope the rest of Marin is doing this.
Yeah.
So we are currently, out of questions for now,
Okay.
but thank you so much for answering what questions we did have and for being available to the public. I know that our listeners are going to be very excited to listen to this podcast. So Dylan and I and everyone else from Next Gen wanted to say thank you, and we're going to end the meeting here.
All right. Thank you, guys. Let's keep in touch.